The risk module in Aramba allows you to create a risk register, to keep track of your reviews for every risk, to classify your risks, to define what treatment you want to do with your risks, and to specify in detail exactly what treatment options you will have if you have controls, project policies, and exceptions. If you have looked at our problems and solutions video, you will most likely understand what I'm talking about here. Now, the module has multiple notifications and reporting capabilities that can help you manage those risks and report on those risks. Aramba has 3 risk modules: asset, third-party, and business risks. Now, the 3 modules work nearly the same way. The difference between them is the input to those risks. Now, with this diagram here, I will be able to explain to you what I'm talking about. We have the 3 risk modules here: asset, third-party, and business risk. As you can see, the difference in between them are the inputs they receive. In the case of the asset risk module, the input is could be an asset, and the asset, could be one or more, needs to have a business unit. A business unit in Aramba is a little bit like a department: IT, HR, finance, or whatever you want to call them. An asset will be something, a computer, a person, a system, whatever. And the idea is that will feed into this type of risk. So for example, if we have a risk that is laptops could be lost or stolen, and that could create a mess in the organization, well, the asset most likely for that risk will be called laptops, and that asset laptops will be owned by a department that could be, for example, the IT department. Now, that risk in here will have a treatment. Let's say that you want to mitigate that risk, or you're actually mitigating the risk because you have laptop encryptions. So then you will have a control here called laptop encryptions. The control will be linked to that asset. You might have as well an encryption policy or a asset management policy here, which will also link to that risk. So you see, the idea here is that you will create the risk with the help of inputs that will help you give context to the risk, to help explain people what the risk is all about. And then you have the solution side where you're telling people how you're treating that risk. Third-party risks, as you can see, take as an input an asset and a third party. An example of a third-party risk could be that laptops could be lost or stolen during the night shift when the cleaning company is helping us to keep things tidy in the office. Now, the asset will be the same, the business unit will be the same, and the third party could be the cleaning company. And again, the idea here will be that this risk in here will have different treatment options. A business risk typically focuses more on processes. So for example, if Aramba wouldn't test the software well, we will have many bugs and people will be fed up of us. The business unit will be the development software department, and the process will be testing or building software. The idea again is that you're describing the risk in the sense of a process. So as you can see, we have 3 separate types of risks. The way you create risk, review risk, and so on is exactly the same. What changes are the inputs to these risks. Risk module, you will be able to define your classification. That's entirely up to you. It could be a matrix of any size. You can put the same values you want and the classifications you want. You will define your calculation method. Aramba has 4 different types of calculation methods that you can use. And you will also be able to define your risk appetite in the form of a matrix with colors, which you can define here, or a numerical value. The settings also allow you to define a database of vulnerabilities and threats that you can create in Aramba. Aramba ships with a database, but you can expand that database if you want, and also to define what kind of treatment you want to apply for all your risks, depending on what treatment you choose, whether controls or policies and so on are mandatory. So there is quite a lot of flexibility in the way for you to classify and to calculate the score of your risks. Understand that accountability is a big deal in GRC. We want to make people responsible for owning their share, whether they're part of a problem or their solution. The problem could be the risks, and the solution might be the treatment options we have for those risks, such as controls and policies and these things. For that reason, in Aramba, when you create anything, a risk, a control, a policy, there's always going to be some kind of role, in this case risk GRC contact and risk originator contact, and these people will be part of those items, so in any kind of notification they will be involved. Another big deal of being part of something in Eramba is that in the case of risks, Eramba has reviews. These reviews are automatic with the software. You can't ignore them. You will have to tell Eramba when you want to review your risks. And on those dates, Eramba will send notifications to these people or anyone you want to ask them for their feedback. So when you create a risk, you will have these reviews. And for each one of these reviews, as see, we have a planned date, an actual date, who is involved with the review, what was discussed on the review. And every review has comments and attachments. These comments and attachments are very, very important because here's where you and them will sort of put their feedback or their comments and the discussions and the approvals into the text. So the idea will be that they will write in here and then you build a trail where someone said something and when they said it. So that trail will help cement those decisions that were taken when the risk was created. Again, the idea is to have accountable people and make those people accountable by having those comments and attachments on your reviews. Get attention on the problems and solutions. Eramba is pretty strong on the idea of what we call the second principle. The first principle says that you have a problem. In Eramba, there's a risk. Here you have the titles of the risk. The risk is meant to be explained in Eramba in the form of a title. And then for every risk, you need to define what solutions you have. And remember, the solutions in Eramba are exceptions, controls, projects, and policies. So if you have a risk and the solution is that you're encrypting laptops, that is an activity because someone has to move a finger to encrypt that laptop, and therefore you are using a control. If the problem is a legal problem and that problem requires a contract and you're storing the contract in the policy module, well, the solution will be a policy. If you have a risk for which no one wants to do anything about it, well, in that case, you create an exception because exceptions is what we use in Eramba to say, well, no one wants to do anything about it. Until this date, we are basically not doing anything. And if you have a risk for which you do not have a solution, like a control or policy, but your organization really wants to do something about it in the future, in that case, in Eramba, you will use a project because it's the way you explain in Eramba that there is a plan in the future. Now, status is a very, very important because status is basically how you check whether things are working or not. You need to test controls. If you don't test controls, you don't know whether they're working or not. If you test and you pass, you know things are okay. If you test and you don't pass, you know the control doesn't work. Policies must be reviewed. If you don't review them on time, again, you don't know whether they're applicable or not. Exceptions must be reviewed because they have a deadline, and projects have deadline as well. So how that reflects on your risk practice? As we always say in Eramba, anyone can build a risk register. It's very, very easy to find problems anywhere in your life, in your car, in your company, or in your GRC department. So the list of risks, like you see here, very easy to create. Now, if I have a risk, let's say, for example, data lost, your phone's been lost or stolen. So I know the problem. I know the involved asset. I know who was involved with this risk. This risk was discussed 5 times, so I have 5 reviews. So everyone is totally on the same page. We all know about this problem. We all seem to agree that we want to mitigate the risk. Now, the solution for the risk seems to be a couple of controls and a couple of policies. Now, when we look at these controls, we see that endpoint reviews is a control, has been tested 6 times. I have the dates of the testing. I know who is operating the control, but you see the control failed. So that means that the solution doesn't really work. We also seem to have a project here. And when we look at this project, the project is expired. You see, so we again are not following up on solutions that we said that we put on top of the control. If we look at the policies, we have a couple of policies and one of them is expired. So again, we don't know whether this is updated or not. Now, if you tell people that there is a problem for which you all agree that there will be a set of solutions, but some of these solutions we don't know where they are because they're expired, we know the control doesn't work, there's no possible way that we can claim that we are mitigating the risk, because the intention might be to mitigate, but the reality is that we're not doing that. And the way you reflect that in Eramba is with the help of statuses. You see this risk is here, but we have a status that says the control failed, we have a project ongoing, but also we have a project which is expired. So these statuses are very, very important because they help you understand the reality of your situation. Eramba is obsessed with reflecting the reality of the way you do GRC, and the status is the way you can actually see that in real time. Every time the status is switch on, switch off, remember you can send notifications so these people could be completely aware of what's going on. But again, it's up to you following up on your promises, on the way testing and the reviews and so on, to make sure these statuses do not rise up. Think about it this way. What will happen if your organization loses a laptop and because of that you have a security incident and your customers become aware of that? How would you explain your responsibility on that incident? When you're using a GRC tool, it's much easier than using emails. Emails is non-structured data. It's very difficult to find what someone said when we were doing this or we were deciding that. In Eramba, you have reviews, you have statuses, you have the logs on when the status switch on, switch off. You can show that you were testing, some passed, some didn't pass. You can definitely build a story. Now the story might be nice or not, depending on whether you were doing your things or not, but you definitely have sufficient evidence to explain everyone what was decided and what happened with that decision. That's the reason we use statuses in Eramba. Having a very, very tidy risk management program doesn't really worth much unless you can communicate that effort that you put in here, your effort and the effort of the organization. In Eramba, you have graphical reports. So if I want to go and explain someone the issue we have here with this risk, the data loss, your phone's being lost or stolen, Eramba has multiple types of reports you can say, but the basic one is one that explains the risk and its basic association. So basically what happened with that risk. So it's very important that you are able to explain this risk. Yes, data loss, so we have the title of the risk, the basic attributes of the risks, all our reviews for the risk and its related objects. So we have the risk, what assets, controls, and policies are linked to it. We can see the risk treatment that we have defined with the solutions, where the risk sits on the matrix. These reports can be downloaded as PDF as well. If you want to have a larger picture over all your risks and you want to see a general report, there's different types of reports as you can see here, but the basic one, again, the one that comes with Eramba is this one. As you can see here, I have my risk matrix. I can see how my risks are distributed over the risk matrix. I can see risk score and residual over time. So we have a timeline of the risks, our treatment options, the stakeholders, risk owners, accumulated risk by owner, accumulated risk by stakeholders, by departments, status. So again, you have multitude of charts that you can use to communicate your risks. You can also create filters and send those filters by emails as notifications. So you could say, send me all the risks that changed since last week, or send me all the risks that I need to review next week. You can automate those emails to you as regular as often. Again, the reporting capabilities of Eramba should be enough for you to be able to communicate those risks to your organization and stakeholders.